He was never meant to be discovered. 3 German Shepherd pups, no more than 5 months old, dangled upside down in the suffocating stillness of a desert watering hole. Their legs wound tightly in silver duct tape, their mouths sealed shut, left as if the world had already forgotten them. Death hovered near, circling closer with every breathless second, until fate brought a squad of U.S. Marines across their path. What happened next wasn't part of any training manual. It wasn't about tactics or survival drills. It was something deeper. A struggle not only for life, but for the very soul. In the next moments, you'll witness a story forged in pain and turned toward healing. A story where justice arrived not in wrath, but in compassion. Not with thunder from the skies, but with 3 broken dogs and 1 soldier who still believed in mercy. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe second chances are the quiet miracles of heaven, type Amen in the comments, share this video, and make sure you subscribe. Because what you're about to see is proof that love, especially the 4-legged kind, changes everything. The sun clawed its way over the dunes of southern New Mexico, spilling molten light across cracked soil and skeletal husks of old mesquite trees. It was mid-June, the kind of month where heat smothered everything in its reach. Just outside a dot of a town called Last Ember, a place so small it hardly showed up on maps, the desert spread endless and merciless. The town itself was nothing more than a cluster of faded trailers, a sun-bleached diner with peeling paint, and a gas station that still used pumps older than half its customers. Here, the world seemed to hold its breath. The gullies carved deep into the land were bone-dry, rocks fractured by decades of heat. Even the morning air pressed like a heavy palm against the back of the neck. Sergeant Miles Brody adjusted the brim of his boonie hat, eyes scanning the horizon with the steady calm of someone who had spent too long in terrain that punished the unprepared. He moved with quiet economy, every step, every glance, like a man who understood the desert drained more than water, it drained willpower. Brody stood at 6'1", his frame sharpened by years of service. His eyes, brown and muddy, the color of a river after a storm, carried the weight of battles he rarely spoke of. A faint scar traced the edge of his right cheekbone, only visible in certain angles of light. It was the kind of scar men brought back from places like Kandahar, where missions could unravel in the blink of an eye. But it wasn't the scar that had altered him most. It was the loss of his K-9 partner, Riker. Riker hadn't been just a working dog. He was Brody's shadow, his anchor in the chaos of deployments. 2 years earlier, an ambush had stolen Riker's life. Since then, something inside Brody had gone quieter, heavier. He still trained recruits, still led with unwavering discipline, but the exhaustion behind his eyes never lifted. That morning, Brody was leading a small recon unit of 3 Marines on a navigation exercise through the desert. They had camped near a natural spring locals called the Last Ember Oasis. The water there was harsh, metallic, but cold enough to matter in a place like this. Hidden in a shallow hollow of cliffs, framed by ragged palms and stubborn cacti, the oasis looked like a secret the desert tried to bury. Walking a few paces behind Brody was Corporal Logan Kershaw. Just 22, wiry with sandy red hair that refused to stay neat and freckles that always looked a little sunburned, Logan carried the restless optimism of youth. He absorbed lessons fast and looked up to Brody with the admiration of a younger brother. Behind him, Lance Corporals Jace Ortega and Shaw Dilly followed. Ortega, compact and broad-shouldered, carried himself with the confidence of someone used to heat and hardship. His Mexican heritage showed in his strong features, his faith in the rabbit's foot his grandmother had given him, and in the whispered prayers he sometimes muttered under stress. Dilly, on the other hand, was a stark contrast, tall, pale, deliberate, with a reserved presence. He was the kind of man who listened longer than he spoke, and when he did, people paid attention. The 4 Marines trudged through rising waves of heat shimmer, boots grinding against grit and sand. Brody eventually lifted a hand. "Break here. 10 minutes. Hydrate." They dropped their packs beneath the meager shade of a crooked palm. Logan flopped onto his back, throwing his arm across his face. "Sir, this place gives me the creeps," he muttered. "Something about it feels wrong." Ortega spat a mouthful of water into the dust. "Because it's cursed, bro. My uncle swore people go missing out here." "Everything feels cursed in the desert," Dilly replied dryly. He wasn't dismissing the thought, his tone carried quiet agreement. Brody didn't join the chatter. His gaze was fixed on the trees edging the spring. Something gnawed at his instincts. Yes, the wind had picked up, rustling leaves. But in between the gusts lay a silence so heavy it didn't belong here. No insects. No birds. No sound of life. Just air, and something underneath it. Without a word, he rose and started toward the tree line, signaling the others to stay back. The wind seemed to die as he approached, the world pausing its breath. His boots sank into damp soil where the spring fed the earth. A glint of silver flashed in the shade. Brody rounded a palm, and froze. 3 small bodies dangled from the branches, suspended upside down with duct tape. German shepherd puppies, their legs wound tight, their muzzles sealed. Their fur was caked in dust and heat, limp as if already surrendered to death. They hung like grotesque ornaments, silent and broken. Brody's heart stuttered. For a second, his mind refused to register the scene. Then adrenaline shot through him like fire. "Logan." His voice cracked across the Oasis. "Med kit, now." The team rushed forward. Logan went pale, nearly dropping to his knees at the sight. Ortega muttered a prayer in Spanish, voice trembling. Dilly stood rigid, fists clenched, fury in his silence. Brody moved to the nearest pup. Its eyes stared glassy, unfocused. He touched its side gently, no movement. The second pup's tongue protruded, dust crusting its edges. But the third quivered, just barely, a faint tremor in its abdomen. A shaky breath left Brody's chest. "One's alive, maybe more." Logan fumbled open the med kit, pulling shears. Brody's eyes caught on a crumpled sheet of printer paper pinned at the base of a tree with a snapped twig. He tore it free. 4 words scrawled in jagged black marker. Just what they deserved. Something shifted inside him. Not rage, purpose. His voice hardened. "We don't leave them here. Cut them down. Gloves on. Careful." No one questioned him. They moved quickly, deliberate, every action precise under the scorching eye of the desert. Because whatever cruelty had done this, it was colder than the heat around them. Brody cradled the first lifeless pup as Ortega sliced the tape loose. Its small body collapsed into his arms with the heavy limpness of death. He lowered it gently to the ground, jaw tightening, eyes searching desperately for breath that wasn't there. Nothing. The second pup dangled higher, hidden in palm fronds. Logan scrambled up, unusually gentle in his movements. He whispered under his breath without realizing. "It's okay, little guy. I've got you now." The blade tore through the bindings. Logan caught the pup, and its body twitched, a faint tremor like memory itself. He moved, Logan gasped. Brody was beside him in an instant, hand on the pup's head. Ortega dropped to his knees with the medical pouch, flipping it open. Brody pressed fingers to the thin patch of skin behind the foreleg. A pulse, weak, fluttering, but real. "He's alive," Brody whispered. "He's really alive." They laid him beside the first. Shallow breaths, fragile but steady. The third pup was smaller, wedged between branches like someone had tried to hide him. Dilly scanned the area, voice low. "Boot prints. Fresh. Trees damaged, too." Brody only nodded. Whoever had done this was gone. He focused on the last pup. Tan with a white star between his eyes, he looked almost peaceful despite the tape sealing his mouth. His chest rose faintly. "Third one's alive too." Logan worked trauma scissors carefully through the sun-baked adhesive while Ortega dripped water onto the tape to soften it. Every millimeter tore tufts of fur. "Hold on," Brody murmured, supporting the fragile body. "Almost there." The last strip came loose. A cracked whimper broke the silence, a muffled, desperate sound. Everyone froze. The pup had whimpered. "He's in there," Brody breathed, voice hoarse. "He's still fighting." They set him beside the others, shielding them from the sun with packs and shirts. Ortega prepped electrolyte packets, muttering, "We need shade, a cooler, something. They won't last in this heat." "Not enough," Brody said. "We move them. Now." At that moment, a voice echoed from the ridge above. A woman's voice. "Everything okay down there?" The Marine stiffened until Brody lifted a hand. A figure descended cautiously, a woman in her 30s, wiry frame, hair tied back, med pack slung across her chest. She moved like the desert was no stranger. "I'm Dany Harper," she called, scanning the scene as she drew closer. "Wildlife rehab out of Santa Clara. I check this area sometimes." Her eyes landed on the pups, and her expression hardened. "Oh God, what kind of monster?" Brody studied her quickly, then asked, "You have experience with trauma cases?" She nodded. "I've handled cruelty rescues. They need fluids, warmth, controlled temps. If you can get them to me, I can keep them alive long enough for proper care." She was already pulling wraps and cloths from her pack. Brody gave a sharp nod. "Ortega, ride with her. Logan, get the Humvee. Move." Within minutes, 2 pups were swaddled in makeshift carriers. The lifeless one stayed behind under a t-shirt, shaded by the trees. Brody crouched by the small body, resting a hand gently on it. "You're not forgotten," he whispered. The Humvee engine roared to life, the Oasis filled with the sound of boots running toward hope. By the time the Humvee thundered down the southern ridge of the Oasis, the sun was at its cruelest peak. The digital thermometer on the dash flashed red, 104 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Inside the vehicle, the air was thick with sweat and urgency. In the back, Sergeant Brody cradled the smallest pup against his chest. Barely 5 pounds of trembling bone and fur, the little one was swaddled in a fleece jacket cooled by melting ice packs. Each shallow breath rattled like a fragile thread stretched too thin. Brody's jaw was locked tight, his eyes sharp with the focus of a man who had seen too many die in his arms. His left hand supported the puppy's head while his right gently worked an improvised syringe, dripping diluted electrolytes into the gums. The pup's fur was damp, ears twitching faintly, body jerking with occasional spasms. Then, suddenly, its mouth seized in a stiff spasm, eyes rolling white. "Logan, pull over. Now." Brody barked. The Humvee screeched to a halt beside a jagged rock outcropping. Logan's hands shook against the steering wheel, his freckles gone pale. Ortega jumped out clutching the second pup wrapped in a makeshift t-shirt bundle. "What happened?" he demanded, panic cutting through his usual swagger. "He's seizing," Brody snapped, already yanking open the med bag. "I need Dany's packs, stat." Behind them, a silver Tacoma skidded into place, dust swirling in its wake. Dany Harper leapt from the cab, her arms sunburned and slick with sweat, fingerless gloves strapped to her hands. She had rigged a damp cloth around her neck, the fabric dripping onto her tank top. She was already moving before the Marines finished speaking. "I've got glucose. Cooling blankets rigged off my solar panel," she said breathlessly, dropping to her knees beside Brody. She yanked a foil-wrapped pad from the cooler and pressed it under the pup's body. The tiny shepherd twitched violently. For a terrible second, its chest stopped moving. "No, no, no," Dany whispered fiercely. "Stay with us." Brody injected another measure of diluted fluid and began rubbing the pup's chest in small circles. His voice dropped to a murmur meant only for the fragile ears he cradled. Come on, little one. Fight with me. Don't let go. Nearby, Dilly stood guard with the third pup, the one still unconscious but stable for now. He had wrapped it in a sunshield blanket, propped carefully atop a folded uniform shirt. His pale eyes swept the horizon. Dust front rolling in, he said flatly. Coming from the southeast. Visibility's about to tank. Dany glanced up quickly. Not a full storm, but bad enough to foul the filters. We need to move fast. Before they could load again, another figure approached, this one older. A petite woman in her late 50s with curly, graying hair under a wide-brimmed hat. She carried a hard cooler and a crate labeled Wildlife Rescue. That's Clara, Dany said without looking up. My mentor. Retired vet, ran a sanctuary before a fire destroyed it. Clara moved quickly, crouching beside Ortega with the second pup. Her hands were small but confident, fingers probing paws and ears. Too close, she muttered grimly. 20 minutes before liver failure sets in if we don't stabilize. You've got a seizure case again on the edge. Brody didn't waste words. He secured the glucose pad with a stretch bandage, lifted the pup back into his arms, and signaled to load. We roll. Now. Dany nodded sharply. Closest clinic with proper equipment is Dust Haven. I called ahead, they're ready. Clara pressed a vial into Brody's hand. Half dose if he seizes again. Rear leg. No more, no less. She locked eyes with him, her tone softening for a moment. You're doing good, Sergeant. Don't stop now. Brody gave a small nod, climbing back into the Humvee with the pup swaddled carefully against his chest. The ride stretched long across gravel and ridges. Logan pressed the gas as hard as the terrain allowed, eyes flicking constantly to the mirror. Ortega sat in the passenger seat, blasting the fan toward the back, where Brody worked silently, every movement measured. You name him yet? Ortega asked after a moment, voice low. Brody didn't answer right away. He studied the shallow rise and fall of the puppy's chest. His own voice came barely above a whisper. Not until he earns it. The others said nothing. Logan muttered a short prayer under his breath, something about grace and second chances. He wasn't religious, not really. But in the desert, where life slipped quietly into death without warning, prayer seemed like insurance. Dust Haven appeared at last, a sun-bleached ghost of a town, scattered low buildings and water tanks glinting like mirages. The clinic sat on the outskirts, a squat stucco building with a red cross painted above the door. As the Humvee roared into the lot, a woman in scrubs sprinted out to meet them. She was tall, mid-30s, with braided black hair pulled tight and eyes that carried the sharpness of command. Bring them straight in, she called. Incubators ready. Move. Dr. Rhea Miles, once a Navy trauma vet, took the first bundle from Ortega's arms without hesitation, barking orders as her team rushed into motion. Within minutes, the 3 pups lay on warmed pads under sterile light. Monitors beeped, IVs slid into tiny veins, oxygen masks secured over trembling muzzles. Brody stood outside the glass, hands streaked with blood and dust, silent. His eyes locked on the smallest pup, the one who had nearly slipped away. The hiss of oxygen and rhythmic beeping filled the room like a steady prayer. Logan hovered nearby. A young tech with tired eyes leaned toward him, voice hushed. Cases like this, they stay with you forever. Logan nodded, throat tight. Yeah. They'll stay with all of us. The desert wind rattled the clinic's windows, but inside, for the first time since the Oasis, there was cool air, clean light and something stronger than both. Hope. The hours blurred inside the sterile facility. Fluorescent lights buzzed, casting an unforgiving glow over rows of metal carts. The air carried antiseptic and damp fur. In this space, time was measured not by minutes but by the rise and fall of fragile breaths. Dr. Kayla Morin leaned over the incubator, her gray eyes locked on the smallest pup's frail body. She was tall, wiry, her hair pulled beneath a navy cap. A scar above her eyebrow caught the light when she moved, shrapnel from Kandahar. Before being transferred here, she had served as a trauma vet for marine logistics units overseas. "All three are severely dehydrated," she murmured to her assistant, Corporal Renee Fan. "Get subcutaneous fluids in. Rotate heating pads every 10 minutes. Her eyes lingered on the tiniest shepherd. "That heart won't hold long." Brody stood outside, arms folded, shirt damp with sweat and streaked with dust. He hadn't spoken since arriving. He didn't need to. His gaze fixed on the incubator told everyone exactly what mattered to him. Inside, the largest pup's breathing had steadied. The mid-sized one twitched faintly, a flicker of progress. But the smallest, the tan one with the faint star on his forehead, remained on the edge, chest barely rising. Kayla pulled off her gloves, stepping into the hall. "This is more than heat stroke. Hanging upside down that long caused cerebral swelling. I've seen it once before in war rescues. It's brutal. They weren't just left there. They were meant to die." Brody's eyes never left the glass. His voice came low, rough. "I lost a dog. Riker. German Shepherd. Took shrapnel pulling me out of a minefield. I carried him 3 miles, but he bled out before the bird came. His throat caught. He saved my life." Kayla's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Brody exhaled, slow, jagged. "He was everything. Buried him under a fig tree. No marker. Just silence." His gaze flicked to the star-marked pup. "These 3, they don't deserve the same ending." A shrill alarm cut the air. Inside the incubator, the monitor flatlined. "Pup 3's crashing." Renee shouted. Kayla slammed on gloves, rushing inside. "Epinephrine, now." She began compressions with 2 fingers, whispering as she worked. "Come on, little one. Stay with me." The room went still. Brody braced against the doorway, silent, eyes locked. Ortega and Logan stood frozen, breaths held. The monitor stayed flat, then spiked. One blip. Another. A ragged, unsteady rhythm returned. Kayla exhaled. "We've got him back." Relief washed through the room like a tide. Renee's shoulders sagged. Logan's eyes burned with tears he didn't dare let fall. Brody closed his eyes briefly, one long breath easing from his chest. Kayla stripped off her gloves, stepping back out. "He's not safe yet, but the odds shifted. You pulled him from hell, Sergeant. Now we see if he walks back." Brody gave the smallest nod. "What now?" "Now we wait," she said softly. "And we believe they want to fight as much as we do." Later that evening, the clinic quieted. The machines hummed softly, monitors flickering with steady rhythms. Brody sat in a folding chair beside the incubator, elbows on his knees. He wasn't reading anymore, though a battered copy of The Old Man and the Sea rested open in his lap. His voice had been low and gravelly earlier, reading aloud not for himself but for the 3 small bodies inside the glass. He hadn't chosen the book because it was a favorite. He chose it because it was a story about endurance. About refusing to let go, even when nature tried to break you. The smallest pup, the one who had flatlined, lay curled, chest moving faintly. His fur was pale tan mixed with gray, like ashes after fire. Between his eyes, the white star seemed to glow faintly in the sterile light. Brody whispered almost unconsciously. "Ash." The name had arrived uninvited, like all true names do. The clinic was hushed under dim amber light, machines humming softly as the desert night pressed against the windows. Brody remained in his chair by the incubator, not moving, not speaking. He simply watched. Ash, tiny, fragile, star-marked, breathed in shallow but steady rhythm, his chest rising like a tide too weak to reach the shore. For the first time since Riker's death, Brody found himself speaking into silence without bitterness. His voice carried low, meant only for the fragile ears on the other side of the glass. "You're going to need a name," he murmured. "But not yet. Not until you're ready to carry it." The desert wind rattled the olive trees outside, but inside the only sound was breath and the stubborn defiance of survival. Hours slipped by. The fluorescent glow dimmed further, leaving the clinic in twilight. The three puppies lay like motionless toys in the recovery chamber. Still. Too still. Brody sat closer, a dog-eared copy of Where the Red Fern Grows on his lap now. His deep, gravelly voice read slowly into the air. He wasn't reading for himself anymore, he was reading for them. As if the rhythm of words could tether them to life. He glanced toward Ash. The smallest hadn't made a sound in nearly 18 hours. His coat shimmered faintly gray and tan under the faint light, that star-shaped patch between his eyes marking him like a brand of destiny. A quiet knock on the door stirred Brody. A lanky nurse peeked in, David, tall, curly-haired, a faint limp trailing his step. Faded tattoos curled along his forearm, ghosts of a younger man. He had worked with K-9 units overseas, carried his own scars from a warehouse fire where he dragged out a Belgian Malinois when he should have run. "Everything holding?" David asked softly. Brody nodded. "Stable. No changes." David lingered, studying the man who hadn't left the pup's side. "You ever think about fostering?" Brody looked up, surprised. "I'm still active duty." David shrugged with a faint grin. "Doesn't mean you can't fight for them. Looks to me like you already made your choice." He left without waiting for an answer. Brody turned back to Ash, hand brushing against the glass. The pup's eyes stared unfocused, but alive. His brothers lay nearby, one larger, dark bands around muzzle and paws, the other leaner, sable, curious even in sleep. They were waiting, all three. Waiting for someone to show them the world wasn't always cruel. Brody leaned back and resumed reading. His voice wrapped the room in steady cadence, stories of barracks mornings, desert drills, and even of Riker, the shepherd who once guarded his dreams. He told them how Riker barked at the coffee grinder, how he curled by the door every night. A faint smile ghosted his lips as the memories spilled out unplanned. He must have drifted into a shallow doze, because the first sensation that woke him was a tickle across his knuckles. Brody blinked, heart lurching. Ash had moved. Just a twitch, a paw shifting, a tiny ripple along his body, but enough to break the silence. Brody leaned forward, breath trapped in his chest. Ash's eyes, glazed with exhaustion, blinked once. Then his tongue flicked out, the smallest pink slip, and he licked Brody's hand, weak, tremulous, but deliberate. The Marine froze. He didn't call the nurses. Didn't speak. He simply held the moment in stillness, reverent as prayer. "You're still in there," he whispered, voice breaking. "You didn't give up." Ash closed his eyes again, too weak to stay awake. But the message had been sent. No machine, no monitor, no vet could say it louder than that one fragile lick. Brody leaned close to the glass. "I see you," he murmured. "And you're still here." The days blurred into a rhythm of cautious hope. Mornings meant rounds, whispered encouragement, syringe feedings, and the slow rituals of recovery. The staff moved carefully, their voices soft, their hands steady. Healing wasn't loud. It was patient. By dawn on the third day, change began to show. Not dramatic, but real. Dr. Kayla Moran entered the therapy room carrying a yoga mat and laminated sheets of rehab diagrams. Her green scrubs looked wrinkled, silver threading her braid, exhaustion plain but focus sharper still. "Today's the day," she told Brody quietly. "We try movement." Brody knelt beside Ash's crate. The pup sat upright, barely, but on his own. His ribs showed thin beneath his fur, but his eyes, dark, sharp, were clearer than before. The star on his forehead caught the light as though glowing. "You ready?" Brody asked softly. Ash twitched his ears in answer. Logan entered carrying a water bowl and a small toy, an old raccoon plush missing one ear. His shirt was buttoned crooked, his hair a mess, but his grin wide. "Morning, Sunshine Squad," he announced. "Guess who peed on my boot today?" The largest pup stood in his crate, broad and sable, tail thumping. His bark rattled the kennel walls, low and gruff. "That's Dusty," Logan chuckled. "Sounds like a broken engine." "Strong heart," Kayla noted, jotting it down. The third pup, tan and black, smaller than Dusty but sharper-eyed, was already trotting wobbly laps around the room. He nosed open corners, sniffed baseboards, even swiped playfully at the mop leaning nearby. "That one Scout," Logan said with a laugh. "Smart eyes." "Too smart." Kayla nodded. "Curiosity's a good sign. Means the trauma didn't lock him down." Her eyes shifted back to Ash, still curled on his blanket. "But this one, he'll need help." Brody lifted Ash gently, placing him on the mat. The pup whimpered faintly, his thin legs trembling as Brody steadied him. "Okay, little man," Brody whispered. "Let's see what you've got." Kayla demonstrated, guiding his rib cage, nudging his hind legs. "Just seconds at first," she explained. "We're not asking him to run, just remember the ground." Ash swayed, legs buckling almost instantly. But Brody's arms steadied him, his voice soft in his ear. "I got you." 4 seconds. 5. Then Ash collapsed back into Brody's lap. But he had stood. "That's the moment," Kayla said, a quiet smile breaking her sternness. Logan whooped. "Way to go, Ash." Dusty barked in response, startling himself backward. Scout bounded over and licked Ash's ear. The bond was instant. Brody felt his throat tighten. He stroked Ash's head, whispering, "You stood up. That's all you needed to do." That evening, the 3 pups curled on a shared blanket in the kennel room. Staff who usually kept distance from recovery cases slipped them toys and treats. Renee brought a squeaky lamb. David set up a speaker with soft guitar music. The clinic's mood had shifted. Survival was no longer the only goal. Healing had begun. Brody sat with Logan on the back steps of the clinic, watching the desert bleed into sunset. The air cooled but stayed dusty, painting the horizon in bruised shades of red and gold. "They're different," Logan said at last. "Not just how they look. How they are. Ash is quiet, like you. Dusty's loud and goofy, like me. And Scout, he's like both of us mixed together." Brody actually chuckled. "Trouble in boots." Logan grinned. "I think they were meant to find us. Or we were meant to find them." Brody didn't answer. He watched as the first stars pierced the darkening sky, thinking of second chances, how they sometimes came disguised as pain, as silence, or as a trembling paw that refused to stay down. Inside, the pups slept together, Scout snoring against the toy raccoon. Ash stirred, opening one eye briefly. He lifted his head, glancing toward the glass where Brody had been. Then he sighed softly and dropped it back again, as if finally content. Night deepened. Machines hummed softly, the steady lullaby of recovery. The pups had been asleep for hours. Progress marked the day, Ash walking 4 supported steps, Dusty barking at his reflection, Scout breaking into the mop closet again. It had felt like hope was winning. But sometime after 2:30 in the morning, the temperature dipped. The desert turned cold, wind scraping the metal walls. Brody had fallen asleep in his chair. The book slid from his lap to the floor. The first sound that stirred him was faint, whimpers. Then growls. Not playful, not weak. Low, guttural, wrong. He sat upright instantly. All 3 pups were twitching in their sleep. Dusty's legs jerked violently, his body shivering as if caught in a storm. Scout whined high-pitched, curling into a tight knot. But Ash's body spasmed in sharp bursts, his mouth tearing into a raspy yelp that froze Brody's blood. The sound was hollow, like memory dragged back into flesh. Brody stood, instincts screaming to intervene. But training stopped him. Waking a dog mid-nightmare could be dangerous. Instead, he flicked on the soft overhead lamp, crouching by the pen. "Easy," he whispered, voice low and calm. "It's just a dream. You're here. You're safe." Ash thrashed, knocking his blanket aside. Brody's voice dropped to a murmur. "It's over. You're not alone anymore." 15 minutes passed. Dusty and Scout calmed. But Ash stayed locked in his terror, ears flat, teeth bared, breath ragged. Brody sat on the floor cross-legged, leaning against the glass. His voice was softer now, almost a confession. "I know what it's like. To wake up and still think the war's happening. To believe the fire's still coming. I used to see Riker, every night. He'd run toward me just before the blast. I'd scream in my sleep, same as you. Same as now." Ash let out a high, piercing cry. Then, suddenly, he bolted upright, chest heaving, eyes wide. Disoriented, he searched the room, until his gaze found Brody. The pup stumbled forward, trembling. Then, with a desperate burst of will, scrambled over the blankets and launched himself against the door of the pen, yipping weakly. Brody opened the hatch without hesitation. Ash leapt into his lap, burying his face in Brody's chest, body shaking violently. The Marine wrapped his arms around him slowly, protectively, like shielding a fragile flame from the wind. One hand stroked the star-shaped patch on his head. The other pressed against his small back. "I'm here," Brody whispered. "You found me." They stayed like that for a long time, man and pup pressed together in the dim light of the clinic. Ash trembled so hard it seemed his small body might splinter, but Brody didn't loosen his hold. He kept one steady hand stroking the star-shaped patch between Ash's ears, the other pressed gently against his back, grounding him in a way words couldn't. "I've got you," Brody whispered. "It's over. You're safe now." Minutes stretched into hours. Outside, the desert wind hissed against the windows, but inside there was only the fragile sound of a pup's uneven breaths. Around dawn, Nurse Jody passed through the hall. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s, known for her stern manner but fiercely protective heart. She stopped when she saw them, Brody on the floor, Ash curled tight in his lap, finally asleep again. She didn't interrupt. She just gave a small approving nod and walked on. By the time the first light bled into the clinic windows, the trembling had stopped. Ash's chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, no more whimpers. Dusty stirred, licked his brother's nose, then flopped back down beside Scout. For the first time in years, Brody leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Sleep came, and the ghost of Riker did not follow. Weeks passed, and the desert outside shifted from burning days to brittle cold nights. Inside Camp Valhalla, the transitional hub for Marines returning from deployments, healing took a different form. Therapy sessions, quiet drills, and new purpose filled the days. One morning, golden light poured across the training yard. Small American flags lined the paths, fluttering faintly in the warm breeze. A hand-painted banner stretched across the courtyard wall. K-9 Support Graduation, welcome to the team. Brody stood at the edge of the parade field, boots scuffed, sleeves rolled up. His face, once carved tight with grief, had softened. There was still gravity in his stance, but also a stillness, as though the heavy weight he'd carried for years had finally slipped from his shoulders. Beside him, Ash sat tall and alert. 6 months had transformed him from a fragile bundle of bones into a sleek, steady young shepherd. His coat shimmered tan and gray like desert stone, and the white star still shone on his forehead. His eyes matched Brody's now, quiet, serious, watchful. To Ash's left, Dusty paced in eager circles, tail thumping, barking in deep bursts that rattled the air. His sable coat gleamed under the sun, his broad build promising strength and loyalty. Logan, standing proudly at his side, fought not to laugh as Dusty tugged the leash forward. "We're working on patience," Logan muttered, grinning. "One bark at a time." On the far end, Scout pranced happily, a bright red bandana knotted around his neck. A gift from one of the veterinary techs, it made his sharp eyes seem even keener. He sniffed every boot, wagged at every marine, and knew the field's layout by heart already. His handler, Sergeant Cara Lynn, stood beside him. Petite, with cropped curls and a spark in her eyes, Cara had transferred to Valhalla 3 months earlier after a difficult reassignment. She hadn't believed in a therapy program, until Scout had clambered into her lap during orientation and refused to leave. They'd been inseparable since. The crowd formed a half-circle near the flagpole, officers, corpsmen, staff, and even civilians from Dust Haven. Among them stood Dr. Kayla Morin, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her head. She didn't smile often, but today her lips curved faintly. Renee Fan snapped pictures with a camera, capturing the moment. Colonel Everett Chase approached the podium. Silver-haired, lean, his voice carried the weight of decades, though today it held something gentler. 6 months ago, he began, 3 pups were found in the desert. Bound. Left for dead. They had no names, no hope. But a unit didn't look away. They stopped. They cared. And because of that, these dogs are here today, not victims, but part of our family. He gestured to Ash, Dusty, and Scout. We welcome them as official members of the K-9 support team. Applause broke across the field. Logan gave Dusty a thumbs up, and the shepherd barked so loudly it startled a junior officer, sending laughter rippling through the ranks. Brody knelt beside Ash, adjusting the tan vest on his back. The words Emotional Support Unit, USMC, were stitched across it. He rested a hand along Ash's spine, letting the fur slide under his palm. Leaning close so no one else could hear, he whispered, "They wrote just what they deserved. But this is what you deserve. Life. Purpose. Belonging." Ash didn't bark or wag. He simply pressed his forehead lightly against Brody's chest before resuming his posture, calm, steady, unshaken. Photos were taken, badges clipped to harnesses. Cara tossed Scout a celebratory tug toy, which he tried to chew even as officers shook hands. Dusty rolled over mid-photo, tongue lolling, sending Renee into laughter as she snapped the shot. When the ceremony ended and the crowd drifted away, Brody lingered by the flagpole. Ash sat quietly beside him, gaze sweeping the horizon as though he too understood the gravity of the moment. Jody approached, clipboard in hand, a styrofoam cup of black coffee in the other. She wore jeans and a faded t-shirt with a paw print across the chest. "He looks good," she said, nodding toward Ash. "All 3 of them do." Brody nodded, his hand dropping to scratch behind Ash's ear. "You were there that night," he said quietly. When he woke up. "I remember," Jody replied. "And I remember thinking he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing you." Brody didn't speak, but his hand stilled on Ash's head. Jody held out the clipboard. "Final adoption forms. If you're still sure." His name was typed neatly on the line, Ash's ID code beside it. Brody signed without hesitation. Ash let out a small huff and laid down at his boots, as though the matter was already decided. They stood together in silence, man and dog, beneath the flutter of flags overhead, stars, stripes, and the marine emblem catching the late sun. Somewhere near the barracks, a whistle blew. Dusty barked. Scout yipped. And the desert wind picked up once again. This time, it didn't carry cruelty. It carried the sound of home. Sometimes miracles don't come with fire or thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in trembling paws, in a soldier's steady hand, in love offered where the world had turned its back. Ash, Dusty, and Scout weren't simply rescued. They were chosen to be light in the darkness. Proof that even in the harshest corners of the desert, God's work isn't finished. Healing comes through connection. Redemption through kindness. Justice through unwavering faith. If this story has touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe. Together, we can spread reminders that no soul is too lost to be found. And if you believe every life deserves a second chance, type Amen below.